After inviting viewers to write in with their experiences, we've realised that many Weird World watchers seem to live side by side with eerie hauntings and other unexplained phenomena. John in the United Kingdom has sent this account of the strange occurrences in his family's first flat. John writes that when he was first married, he and his wife lived in a Victorian rectory that had been converted into flats. The rectory was next to a Norman church in Barwell, Leicestershire, and their flat was at the back, at the church end of the building and on the ground floor. The couple were there for about 2 years, while saving enough money to buy their first house, and during that time they experienced many things that could be attributed to paranormal activity. While John accepts that a cynic could rationally explain away the strange, everyday type occurrences, there were 2 incidents that were disturbingly mystifying. They found that the eerie experiences came in groups every 3 or 4 months, which were followed by periods of peace and quiet before more occurrences kicked off again. John gave several examples of the strange day-to-day incidents. On one occasion, his wife baked a sponge cake, after which she spread jam on one disc and then placed the second disc on top. She left it in the kitchen, but on her return an hour later, found the 2 halves lying side by side. A rational explanation could be that she didn't place the layer on top as she thought she had, but then we tend to remember these anomalous happenings. Still with the cakes, another day John's wife went to the pantry to get some eggs to bake a cake and found that, bizarrely, all the eggs were hard-boiled. The only rational explanation they could think of was that someone had been sleepwalking and boiled them, or perhaps the butcher's assistant in the local shop had been playing a trick on their customers. The couple's flat had a very large window and full-height curtain in the living room, which he understood had been the rectory's library. The curtain opened and closed on a pull cord, and along the window ledge they kept several pot plants containing cacti. One evening, John went to draw the curtain together for the night and suddenly thought that the swish of the curtain might accidentally break off an extended finger on one of these cacti. On checking, he realised that the fold of the curtain would miss the cactus by a good 15 inches. However, the next morning, the cactus had physically turned around 180 degrees. His rational explanation was that he had turned it around and forgotten he'd done it. At the end of the living room was an open fire in the centre and 15-inch deep alcoves on either side. John had built some shelves into these alcoves to hold books. At this stage of John's working life, he was being paid in cash, about £22.50 a week. He used to come home on a Thursday night and, while keeping the change in his pocket, place the notes he had earned behind the books. On Saturday, he and his wife would take out the notes and go uptown to do their shopping. One week, there was £5 less behind the books than there should have been. After taking out all the books and flicking through them, they were still unable to find the missing £5. It was a big problem to lose nearly a quarter of his weekly money, but they assumed the rational explanation that the chief cashier, where he was employed, had miscounted. 6 months later, they were still placing their money behind the books, but were startled to find that this week there was an extra £5 there. After their frantic searching for the missing note, they couldn't really think of a rational explanation for its sudden appearance. Come wintertime and the arrival of their baby daughter, because the living room was the warmest place in the flat, they used to place the infant in there in her cot during the day. John was at work, so his wife told him afterwards of this strange incident. Their baby daughter was crying as she was hungry, and as most are aware, there isn't much that can be done to placate a hungry, crying baby until it gets its bottle. John's wife swore that as she was about to open the door to the living room, bottle in hand, she heard a woman's voice saying, "There, there, there, there." On opening the door, she found the room empty and their daughter lying in her cot with her fingers and toes curling and uncurling in absolute contentment. John says that the only rational explanation for this incident is that his wife imagined the voice and their daughter sensed that the bottle was just outside. Then he writes, "Sorry, no way. There truly was no explanation for this mystifying experience." During the 2 years John's family were in the flat, they had many such experiences, occurring in groups of 3 or 4 incidents every few months. When they asked neighbours in the other flats, they found that they also had similar unexplained happenings, although on a smaller scale. John then described the 2 things for which he could offer no rational explanation. Below the family's living room was a cellar which contained large white stone, possibly marble, open coffers. Here, he believed, a body would be kept cool before being taken up to the churchyard next door for burial. The layout of the large living room was such that all of their furniture was crowded at the end of the room, with the sofa facing the fire and an armchair at right angles to it on one side of the fire. They didn't have a TV and so spent their evenings playing cards or reading. One night, without warning, a horrendous smell manifested itself directly in front of the sofa on which John was sitting. The smell was in a cigar shape, about 7 feet long by 2 feet wide, and was floor to ceiling. They could walk around it and track its foul odour from floor to ceiling. Outside of the cigar shape, the air was fresh and clean. The smell itself was putrid, and whilst John hadn't smelt rotting flesh, if he had to imagine what it would be like, this was it. The smell persisted for about half an hour and then disappeared without trace. The second strange event also took place in the living room, where again Jack was sitting on the sofa and his wife was on the armchair at a right angle to him. All of a sudden, she gave a startled cry and, on looking up, Jack could see a piece of card falling from her waist. He could see the whole occurrence as the armchair she was sitting in was a modern style with only one arm and the open side of her chair was facing him. She said that this card had hit her on the head, that she had started in surprise when it did that and it had fallen to her shoulder. John then observed it falling from her waist. The card, which John still has, is a sepia, coarse-grained, open-weave postcard entitled "Bedouin at the Oasis" and is blank. Both were deeply unnerved by the event. A few months later, John's wife started to visit some older neighbours in their home care-assisted bungalows on the other side of the road. In general conversation on one of these visits, she was told by one of the elderly ladies that her father had been a gardener at the rectory. She promptly brought out lots of photos, one of which had been taken from the bottom of the lawn area looking up at the rear of the house. On one side of the raised patio were a man and a woman, and the lady then explained that the 2 figures were the reverend who used to preside in the church and his wife. On the other end of the patio stood a soldier in a First World War uniform, complete with spats over his boots. The lady then explained to John's wife that the young soldier was the couple's son and that he had died in Palestine. To this day, John wonders if the old postcard is the one the son intended to send to his parents, but was prevented from doing so by his death. He goes on to say that his first wife had some kind of psychic gift and that their daughter was able to see coloured auras around people in the street. She was aged around 5 or 6 years old when they found that out about her, and she herself thought it was natural and that everyone could see them. Perhaps John's wife and daughter were both some kind of magnet for the seemingly high levels of activity in the family's flat.